Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what it is about the Greens, Mr. Speaker, but every time they speak in this House, it reminds me of that song, "Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way." Because clearly they've been here for 20-odd years, never had to put their head on the block. Mr. Speaker, I just want to comment on the fact... I just want to comment on the fact that this bill really has been a fascinating study of the legislative process and action. No legislation in this House will ever be perfect. No legislation that can ever be passed will be perfect, Mr. Speaker. No legislation has ever solved all the problems in their entirety. And this piece of work is no exception. But, sir, contrary to the protestation of Labor, and clearly now David Clendon, it will make a difference. It will put some curbs on the activities of gangs. It will give our police force another tool in their armoury. It will give some peace of mind to those people working on the front line of our public services. It will give them some protection from intimidation. The intimidation caused when a patch gang member leans on the counter demanding service. And I've seen it, Mr. Speaker. I've seen it in public sector buildings, I've seen it in councils, and it's not pleasant. It will enable our schools to ban patches from their grounds. Mr. Speaker, the Gang Insignia Bill was introduced to this House from the member's ballot by the now Honourable Todd McLeay in response to issues that were affecting his electorate. Todd McLeay then became a minister and passed the bill on to one of our ex-coppers in Mark Mitchell. Who better to steer this bill through the House? Who knows better than an ex-copper the damage these gangs cause to our communities? Mr. Speaker, this bill falls clearly into the orbit of the Law and Order Select Committee and further complements the great result this government has achieved through Ministers Tolley, Collins, Burrows and formerly Simon Power. Mr. Speaker, the Law and Order Select Committee, by Select Committee standards I've witnessed in this House, operates pretty well. Operates under a very good chair and equally good deputy chair. That's right. And frankly, we would normally have a very good relationship with the other members of that select committee as well. And we generally don't cause Phil Goff to have to shout quite as loud as he was shouting in this House earlier in the day. The results, Mr. Speaker, of the law and order policies of this government have been spectacular. A 30% drop in youth crime, a fantastic improvement in police resources through the use of technology on the beat, up to, in fact, in Fielding Police Station, Mr. Speaker, a saving of 20% of the total force in Fielding's time. And that's happened in about 8 months. So to listen to Mr. Farfoy bleating on about the reduction in police budget really makes those figures make a nonsense of that, Mr. Speaker. We've also seen, you're most certainly welcome to table, we've also seen vastly improved rehabilitation, retraining of prisoners, which is making a big difference to the future of those people. Mr. Speaker, these initiatives and achievements complement the further introduction of legislation in this area, including the Bail Amendment Bill, Juries and Jury Services Amendment Bill, the Administration of Community Sentences and Orders Bill, and the Corrections Amendment Bill, and many more. The Gang Insignia Bill sits right alongside those as another tool in the toolbox of the New Zealand Police. Mr. Speaker, crime is an insidious thing. It can have a dramatic effect on a victim. It can equally go unnoticed for years. Crime in our communities is often inflicted on the most vulnerable in our society. You see, Mr. Speaker, criminals are bullies. They don't pick on those who can fight back. Doesn't that remind you or me, in fact, apologies, Mr. Speaker, I'm not trying to remind you, doesn't that remind us of a gang member? They're bullies, and that's what they make their livelihoods from. That's what they spend their life doing, bullying people. And I just wanted to very briefly comment on Mr. Goff's comments on this bill, because I can't believe someone with his vast experience of inept lawmaking can now criticise a government member for bringing a bill to this House and saying it's inept lawmaking. It's inevitable, Mr. Speaker, in the course of making any law, you're going to have inept lawmakers and people who don't make law or whose law doesn't achieve what it was initially set out to do. And I think that everyone who brings law to this, or brings legislation or proposals to this House, particularly members who bring them through the members' bill process, bring them here with the best intentions. And I don't think it's our business to necessarily pull those people apart for the manner in which they do that, Mr. Speaker. Intimidating public servants, people who work for our government and can't dodge people, is not a pleasant way to be. Speaker, in the private sector, we can do what we want with those people. We can deal with them as we like. We can ban them. We can trespass them. We don't have to serve them. In the public sector, our public servants can't do that. At Winds, at the post office, down at the hospital and the school, they've got to look after those people. You may be able to trespass them, but you need to look after those people because that's what we're here for. That's what governments are for. So, Mr. Speaker, this will give them a little bit of an opportunity to manage that a bit better. I want to briefly address Mr. Farfoy's Pacific unemployment issue. In Martin, which is a town in my electorate, Mr. Speaker, I have about 30 to 40 Samoan families a year coming into this country to work in the meat company just down the road. That happens every year. So I fail to understand why we're having, in places like the Rangitikei electorate, large numbers of Pacific Islanders coming into the country to work, and at the other end we have them dropping out of the workforce. That's something we need to address, Mr. Speaker. I also just wanted to, before I finish, Mr. Speaker, comment on the latest edition of The Listener, which I notice is red and it's got risk written all over it. And I suspect that's where we're at, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Speaker.
Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is with